Hello there, and welcome back to the Shaping Your Success channel with the Law Society of Scotland and Hay Legal. Today, we are so pleased to be joined by Pauline Campbell, discussing how to overcome barriers to success. Pauline is a senior litigation lawyer for the London Borough of Waltham Forest. She also works pro bono as sole legal advisor to the Windrush Reach project. Pauline is also the author of Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips, her first full-length non-fiction novel exploring what it means to be British as a first-generation immigrant child of Caribbean parents. In her book, Pauline also examines race and racism in the historical, political, and social contexts of 20th century Britain. Pauline, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So to start with, if you don't mind, I think it would be helpful to discuss some of the barriers to success that you have experienced in your own life. A fact about you that I was shocked to learn was that you were told as a 15-year-old that you were not A-level material. What impact did that have on you, and how did you respond to that in the following years?
I think the biggest impact it had on me was I believed it, because it was coming from a source that you trust, which is a teacher. One of the things I put in the book is that the one constant thing in our lives when we're growing up is our parents and our teachers. So every day we would be amongst them for years of our lives when we were the most impressionable. And so for me, when I was told that, considering before I was extremely bright and doing really well, it really hurt, and I bought into it. But funnily enough, my dad told me not to buy into it. He told me not to believe it. But because I didn't see anyone that looked like me in any doctors or lawyers or people in areas of professions that I dreamed of doing, which was even initially law, I just agreed with it and just basically fell into place with what I was told about myself.
Yeah, and I think it must make such a difference to see people like you succeeding, and if you don't have those role models, that must have been really challenging.
I mean, they were there, but they were sparse. There weren't many. So you didn't have that many to look to get any advice. And one of the biggest disadvantages I think I had at school was I never had a black teacher or anyone who was like me. I know there were black teachers about, but even now they're far and few between, if you look at the numbers across Britain of how many black teachers there are. And I think had I had a black teacher, after reading some of the books that teachers wrote back then, I think that they would have recognized something was wrong and they would have understood me more, and it would have been easier for me to open up to them about the trauma that I was feeling at the time as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, not really understanding where I belonged, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So another interesting thing about you is that you entered the legal profession at probably a later stage than most lawyers, starting your law degree at 33 years old and qualifying at 41. In your book, you explain the challenges of undertaking and funding both the LLB and the LPC while also paying off your mortgage and bills. So my question is, what was it that motivated you to pursue legal studies and a career in law?
I think I grew, with age comes experience and more self-belief in yourself. And the job I was doing was, although it was local authority housing benefits, it was quite a complicated job. It required a lot of understanding legislation, complicated legislation, and I was dealing with the more complex cases, and I would also represent the council in review hearings. But one of the most important aspects was that I was a secretary for the Black Workers Group within Islington. So I would represent people who were dealing with disciplinaries and things of that nature. And I found that the more I did it was the more I realized I could give people a voice. I was confident with arguing people's cases, and I felt that that was the right time, alongside the Stephen Lawrence event and everything that was happening, that it was time for me to think about whether this was the right career for me as a housing benefits officer. And so I moved into the world of law because I felt that I was suited to it and it was what I always wanted to do. So I kind of just went back home in a way when I started to do the law.
That's a beautiful reason to get into the law. I think a lot of people kind of get into law without really knowing that that's what they want to do. So having that, like you say, kind of life experience going into a later stage must be really beneficial. So How has your experience been as someone who entered the profession later in life? And what would you say to someone who perhaps might be worrying that the proverbial ship of a legal career might have already sailed for them?
I would say to people that you're here, you know, there's you're on this earth and you're ticking over. It's what you use to utilize your time while you're here. It's not about your age, it's about your belief in yourself. And it's never too late to move into an area that makes you feel good about who you are if you're not comfortable with where you're at. And it's hard to do it. The hardest part of that journey will be when you start the journey, because you'll have all the self-doubters around you, people who know you're doing okay, you've got a good job, you're paying your bills, you don't need to change your career because financially you're coping and you're on your way to making a good standard of living. But to change that and to flip it into something else, people around you will be nervous. They'll be nervous about you taking on a new career at that time of life. And they won't believe that you can make it unless, and it's not more about you, it's about them. So you have to dispel those doubts that are around you before you work out whether it's something you really want. And you've just got to literally go for it. I read a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway a few years ago, and it was really powerful for me because it took you to a place you didn't want to be. And when you were there, you had to make a decision about whether you were going to take that leap of faith in yourself and feel that fear and do it anyway. And it's the most empowering thing to take that first step, because that's the hardest one to take. And once you're on that journey, you won't get off if it's what you truly want. But if it's not what you want, you will get off. But that doesn't stop you from trying something else. But it gives you power, a sense of empowerment. So I would say, please don't think about, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? Think, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? I'm going to do it anyway. Because what have I got to lose? The only thing that can happen is I won't make it. That's the only thing. So I'm going to do it and see what happens. And that's the stance I took. I was on the road and I was going to stay on it, despite all the issues. And after a while, people get on board with you. They begin to take you seriously. And I'll talk about the book and my writing as well, because that's another whole new career. So that's something that people need to bear in mind. To people you know, there's so many people who have done it, like me and others. Read the books, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. You give yourself the oomph you need to keep you going and those support mechanisms in place if you doubt things, because there's so many of us here who can offer that level of support that you need to help you through that difficult decision and that road.
I think that is such good advice, just generally, and not even just to do with, you know, pursuing a new career, but maybe taking a leap in your current career. I think lots of people will, that's advice people need to hear. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
starting a business, all those things, it's about that as well.
Absolutely. So coming back round to your experiences with racism, which you've detailed in your book, you explain in your book that those of us born enclosed in a black skin have to work twice as hard to prove ourselves in the professional world in which we work. So my question is, in your experience, do you think that in 2022 this situation is improving, and what more needs to be done?
I think things are kind of better than they were, but I still think we've got such a long way to go. Not because I think people are a lot more open, like you and I are talking, Sean. I've met you, I've met so many different people since writing Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips, that shows me that we are on a different level now. We as people generally want to understand each other more, white, black, brown, which is amazing. And I love that. However, the problem that we have is that there's so many people who think it's just another issue that they'd rather not deal with. And so if a person like myself is telling you there's only 1% of black judges, after over 25 years, there's still only 1%. When you look at consultants in hospitals, when you look at numbers of professors who make up black people within these environments, there's so few of us, something's still going wrong. And pupillages for barristers, so many young people of ethnic backgrounds have the same qualifications as their white counterparts, but they still can't break through. So these are the things that tell me you still have to keep fighting. I mean, I'm a senior lawyer and I'm blessed with my colleagues and the work I do, but I know that I still have to prove myself and make sure that I'm on top of my game, because psychologically, you're never going to get over the fact that you've gone through a lot of history of racism, and you only hope that your colleagues believe in you enough to believe that this is a problem and that they're willing to admit that it's a problem. Only last week I read that the civil service and Braverman and Suella Braverman has decided to they want to get rid of any training on diversity and inclusion. They think it's a waste of time, it costs too much money. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, that's your choice, but what are you going to put in the place of that to help people understand what inclusivity and diversity means? It's not just about colour. It's about disability, it's about sexism, it's about misogyny, it's about everything. What are you going to do? And that terrifies me, that we are a civil service, the head of legal who advises the government is saying things like this, because it's my profession and it worries me a lot that's what a lot of certain politicians are thinking. But I'm hoping people don't get on board with that philosophy and they keep going on this journey.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, certainly I've seen in other organizations a real push for towards diversity and inclusion. And I think perhaps there's, sometimes a bit of misguidance or uncertainty of how to go about that. And when you spoke at our in-house annual conference at the Law Society of Scotland earlier this year, among other things, of course, you spoke about the importance of meaningful inclusion in the workplace. So what would you say to people watching this who may be unsure of how to go about starting a conversation about inclusion in their organisation?
I think what they need to do is to be open enough to tell people that they feel uncomfortable with it. That's the starting point for me, because then I see true honesty and openness. And a lot of people that I work with don't want to talk about it. It's an uncomfortable subject to talk about, but I live this subject. I am this subject. We are living it. So it's more uncomfortable for us than it is for you. So trust us enough to want to tell you about our experiences and be open enough to tell us that you want to know. And so for me, inclusivity it incorporates all of that. The start of the conversation is the most important. And anyone who is unsure about where to start, reach out to somebody you trust, who otherwise would not normally be someone that you would speak to, somebody that you work with, but you've never really got to know them, and ask them, what do you think about this? And how do you think we can work together in understanding each other? And I sort of, after meeting you and all these other, and going to the University of Oxford and all the rest of it, I made a massive decision a couple of weeks ago, and I decided, I was looking at the law, when we get the law firms, the biggest law firms, and who's making the most money and all the rest of it. We got the table last week and I looked at it, and Clifford Chance were at the top of that list. And I thought, wow, they're really making lots of money, stuff like that. But it's not just about the money. What are they doing with inclusion and diversity? They have got such a massive program on that, and the person that's leading on it is someone called Tiernan Bradley. I pray I've got his name right. It is Tiernan Bradley, I think. And I reached out to him on LinkedIn because I wanted to tell him about rice and peas and fish and chips. I wanted to tell him about the fact that we are working in a completely different environment to you, but I wanted to talk to you. And he got back to me. And I'll be talking to Clifford Chance in a couple of weeks. But that's what I mean about stretching the boundaries of inclusion and diversity. I can't just do it in my little hub. I have to take it as far as I can in the hope that people will understand our journey. And this might help workers in Clifford Chance to understand their colleagues more who might come from my background. So we'll see what happens. It may be fantastic. It may just be a one-off conversation. I don't know. But he reached back when I reached out to him. And that's what people need to do. reach out to people, talk to them, and get to know whether they're interested in what you have to say and what if you're interested in what they have to say. So we'll watch this space with that.
So on this topic, finally, what would you say is the single most important lesson about overcoming barriers to success that you would urge people to take away from this conversation?
Okay, I would say to them that the only voice that you need to listen to is your own when it comes to the belief in yourself. There'll be so many self-doubters out there ready to give you that advice about what you should and shouldn't do. Of course you need advice to get through. We all need each other. But the strongest person in this process is you. And the barriers that are going to be there are not going to go away just because you've got a belief in yourself. What you have to do is you have to overcome those barriers by making sure you're ready for them. Because these hurdles aren't going to go away just because you've suddenly found this new strength and inner strength. They're going to still be there. It's how you deal with them as and when they come up. And a literary agent did that to me when she was giving me a no to my book, my next book. And I was so gutted when she said no, because a lot of work goes into a new book. And she says, I'm so sorry, and I know you're going to be disappointed. But then she quoted Maya Angelou to me, which showed she really did care about what she was telling me. And she said, Maya Angelou said she had so many rejections, so many disappointments, but what she did was she started to treat rejections as redirection. And that's what this woman told me last week when she said, I don't want your book, but it was brilliant, but I just can't invest in it and all this stuff. So it helped me to get through. So if somebody does put a barrier in front of you and they say no, or they let you down, what you have to hope is that they give you something to take away, which is positive from that. And that's what you do with disappointments. No matter how bad it gets, and it will get bad, it will. The barriers are going to be bad for every one of us. We have to take something away from that and make it work, even though at the time you just don't want to and you feel really bad. So that's what I do now. I sort of cry my eyes out for about 10 minutes and say, oh, why? And then I step back and then I think about, where do I go now? What happens next? The tears are gone. Let's move on, because all you need is one yes. You may get a million no's, but you just need one yes. And that's what you've got to strive for, that one yes.
That's brilliant. And I think a perfect note to close this topic conversation on. So thank you so much, Pauline, for speaking with me on this today.